On Hart Island, stonecutters were raising limestone walls for a 120-room castle when a telegram arrived from New York, and it ended the dream. But the message was not about money or storms or war. Louise Boldt was gone, and George Boldt ordered every hammer to stop where it stood. The tools dropped into the dust. The tunnels went dark. A private Rhineland palace, built as a love letter on the St. Lawrence River, froze at roughly 4/5 complete. And for decades, the abandoned rooms waited, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The millionaire who needed a miracle. He already owned the world's most famous hotel, so why did George Boldt need an island castle to prove anything? By 1900, George C. Boldt controlled the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan. He ran the nerve center of American power and wealth. Presidents dined in his ballrooms. Industrialists signed contracts in his lobbies. The hotel was not just a building. It was a symbol, a machine that turned service into status. Boldt understood hospitality as theater. Every guest needed to feel seen, anticipated, understood. He built that reputation one handshake at a time. But none of it was for strangers. Every empire he built, every staircase he commissioned, every chandelier he hung was aimed at one person, Louise. She was not just his wife. She was the reason the empire existed. The hotels were proof of concept. The wealth was currency for devotion. And devotion, in George Boldt's architecture, required stone. The Thousand Islands sit where Lake Ontario meets the St. Lawrence River. The waterway carves through granite and pine, scattering islands like broken promises across the current. Some islands hold a single cabin. Others hold memories of summer picnics and fishing lines. Hart Island was different. It was 5 acres of rock and soil shaped vaguely like a heart, visible from the water if you squinted and wanted to believe. Boldt wanted to believe. He bought the island in 1895. At first, it was a summer retreat, a place to breathe between seasons at the Waldorf. But breathing was never enough. Boldt saw the Rhine River when he looked at the St. Lawrence. He saw castles on hilltops. He saw Europe, refined and transported, rebuilt where American money could own it outright. So he started building, not a cottage, not a summer house, a castle, a full-scale Rhineland fantasy with turrets and towers and walls thick enough to forget you were in New York. He hired architects who understood old-world romance. He imported craftsmen who knew how to carve stone into lace. The island became a construction site that hummed with ambition. Louise loved it, or maybe she loved that he loved it for her. The line between gift and obsession can be difficult to see when the gift weighs several thousand tons. Boldt did not just build a castle. He built an entire complex, 11 buildings total, a powerhouse to generate electricity for the island, a gazebo for summer afternoons, staff housing for the small army needed to keep the fantasy running, tunnels beneath the island to move servants and supplies without cluttering the view. Everything connected, everything planned, everything controlled. The Thousand Islands had always been a playground for the wealthy. Families like the Pullmans and the Bournes built estates along the waterways. Summer palaces where old money relaxed in wicker chairs and pretended the Gilded Age would last forever. But Boldt was not old money. He was self-made. Born in Prussia, arrived in America with nothing, worked his way up from kitchen steward to hotel magnate. He understood hunger. He understood ambition. And he understood that love, in his language, was spelled in limestone and mortar. The question no one asked him directly was simple. Why does a man who already owns everything need to build a castle on an island in the middle of a river? The answer was harder. Because everything he owned meant nothing if she was not there to see it. The Waldorf was a stage. The castle was a sanctuary. The world came to the hotel. The castle would belong to them alone. Boldt hired 200 workers at the peak of construction. They worked year-round, through winters that turned the river into solid ice. Barges brought materials upstream, stone from quarries, timber from forests, marble from Italy, stained glass from Europe. The island became a factory of beauty, relentless and precise. Louise visited often. She walked the unfinished halls. She approved designs. She imagined where furniture would sit, where light would fall, where their lives would unfold once the work was done. The castle was not designed for guests. It was designed for mornings, for evenings, for the small, private eternities that wealth can buy if you build the container carefully enough. But building a container for eternity is dangerous, because eternity, as it turns out, does not wait for construction schedules. George Boldt was a man who controlled outcomes. He controlled menus, staff rotations, guest complaints, and revenue margins. He could make a hotel run like a watch, but he could not control time, and he could not control the thing that makes castles irrelevant. What kind of love demands stone, tunnels, and a private power plant? The kind that fears being forgotten, the kind that needs proof, physical and permanent, that devotion happened here, the kind that mistakes building for being. Hart Island was not just a construction site, it was a bet, a wager that if he built something grand enough, permanent enough, complete enough, then nothing could touch them. Not time, not age, not death. The island waited, the walls rose, and George Boldt kept building, because stopping would mean asking a question he did not want answered. A love letter made from limestone. The castle was not designed to be visited. It was designed to be believed, room by room, tower by tower. Rhineland architecture is a language of longing. Pointed arches, steep roofs, towers that pierce the sky like exclamation points. It is the architecture of fairy tales, of kingdoms that never quite existed but feel true when rendered in stone. George Boldt imported that language wholesale. He wanted Louise to walk into a dream every time she crossed the threshold. The main building was 6 stories tall. 120 rooms spread across floors, connected by grand staircases and hidden servant passages. The exterior walls were limestone, pale and smooth, quarried and cut to fit like a jigsaw puzzle of permanence. Turrets rose at the corners, each capped with conical roofs that suggested medieval romance without the inconvenience of medieval plumbing. Inside, the design married spectacle with intimacy. A grand ballroom for entertaining, though the guest list would always be small. A library for quiet afternoons. A billiard room for leisurely evenings. Bedrooms designed not for sleep, but for waking up. Inside beauty. Every room had a purpose. Every purpose pointed back to Louise. Boldt hired the best. Architects who had worked on European estates, craftsmen who understood how to bend iron into vines, how to carve wood into waves, how to set tile in patterns that hypnotized. He did not just want quality. He wanted the kind of details that make a building whisper. The castle had its own power plant. Electricity was still a novelty in 1900, especially on a river island miles from the nearest city. But Boldt wanted lights. He wanted control. He wanted the island to glow at night like a jewel box opened in the dark. So he built a powerhouse on the northern tip of the island, a miniature fortress of its own, filled with generators and coal stores and the hum of self-sufficiency. The Ulster Tower rose near the water, modeled after a structure Boldt had seen in Hamburg. It was a smaller building, intimate, meant for private moments away from the main house. 4 stories of stone and stained glass with a roof deck that overlooked the river in every direction. A place to retreat even from the retreat. Beneath it all, tunnels. A network of passages dug into the bedrock, connecting the powerhouse to the castle, the staff quarters to the kitchens, the visible to the invisible. The island had 2 levels, one for romance, one for machinery. The tunnels let servants move like ghosts, unseen and unheard, keeping the fantasy intact. 11 buildings total across the island complex: the main castle, the Ulster Tower, the powerhouse, a gazebo, a dovecote, a boathouse, structures for storage, for staff, for the 1,000 small needs that luxury pretends not to have. Each building connected by stone paths, each path lined with gardens that would bloom in summer and sleep under snow in winter. The construction schedule was relentless. Boldt did not build during summer and pause in winter like most estates. He built year-round. When the river froze, workers crossed on the ice. When storms came, they worked under tarps. The island never slept. Hammers rang at dawn. Saws screamed through timber. Stone dust hung in the air like fog. Louise visited often during those years. She watched walls rise. She walked through framed doorways that opened onto nothing but sky. She imagined curtains, rugs, vases filled with flowers. The castle was hers in potential. Every unfinished room was a promise. But promises have weight, and weight, over time, becomes pressure. The architects presented plans. Boldt approved them. Craftsmen executed them. Inspectors verified them. The process was industrial, mechanical, efficient. But efficiency in service of romance creates a strange tension. Can you schedule devotion? Can you budget eternity? Can you hire love at union wages? The castle demanded. It demanded money, yes. Boldt had money. It demanded time. Boldt had time, or thought he did. But it also demanded something harder to name. Attention. Focus. The slow conversion of a man's energy into stone. Every decision he made about the castle was a decision not made about something else. Every dollar spent on the island was a dollar that declared this matters more. And maybe that was the point. Maybe the scale was the message. A cottage could be ignored. A mansion could be sold. But a castle, a private Rhineland palace on a heart-shaped island, supplied with its own power, surrounded by its own fleet of support buildings, accessible only by boat, that was a declaration. That was proof. That was devotion made so large it could not be misunderstood. But devotion, when it gets that large, stops being a feeling and starts being a structure. And structures, once built, cannot be unbuilt. They can only be finished or abandoned. By 1903, the castle was nearing completion. The exterior walls stood tall. The roof was framed. Interior work had begun. Plasterers shaped ceilings. Carpenters installed wainscoting. Electricians strung wire through walls that would soon be sealed forever. The island buzzed with the final push. The dream was almost real. Louise walked the halls that winter. She touched walls that were still damp. She looked out windows that did not yet have glass. The castle was close. So close she could imagine living in it. So close she could almost feel the first morning when they would wake up inside the finished dream. But closeness is not completion. And completion, in George Boldt's world, was the only thing that mattered. When does a gift stop being a gift and start becoming a test? When the giver needs it more than the receiver. When the building matters more than the person it was built for. When love becomes architecture, and architecture becomes the only language left. The castle rose, the island hummed, and somewhere beneath the devotion, a clock was ticking that no amount of limestone could silence. When perfection starts talking back. The closer the castle got to real, the more it demanded, not just money, but attention, secrecy, and time. Construction in 1903 moved faster than ever. The exterior was nearly complete. The turrets wore their conical caps. The windows gaped, waiting for glass. Inside, rooms took shape. Walls divided space into bedrooms, parlors, kitchens, servants' quarters. The building was no longer a skeleton. It was a body waiting for a soul. Boldt hired specialists for the final details. Artisans who could carve mantles from single blocks of marble. Glaziers who understood how to set stained glass so light became color. Tile workers who laid mosaics one fragment at a time, creating floors too beautiful to walk on, but made for exactly that. Every surface mattered. Every corner had to sing. The scale was staggering. 120 rooms across 6 floors. Each room needed furniture, fixtures, finishes. Each finish needed approval. Boldt reviewed samples. He rejected designs. He demanded revisions. The castle was his vision, and visions do not compromise. But visions cost, not just money. Money was renewable. Boldt made money the way rivers make current. It flowed, it replenished. The real cost was focus. The castle consumed him. Every choice about stone or wood or glass was a choice about legacy, about proof, about whether the thing he was building would be enough. Enough for what? That was the question he never answered aloud. Workers lived on the island during construction season. They slept in temporary barracks. They ate in communal kitchens. They worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when deadlines loomed. The island became a small city dedicated to a single purpose: build the dream, make it perfect, finish before time runs out. Time was the unspoken enemy. Boldt was 53 in 1903. Louise was 41. They were not old, but they were not young. The castle was meant for a lifetime, for decades of summer mornings and winter fires, for growing old together inside walls that would never fade. But lifetimes do not announce their length in advance. The tunnels beneath the island were nearly done, smooth passages carved through bedrock, lit by electric bulbs powered by the island's own generators. Servants could move from the powerhouse to the kitchen without stepping outside. Supplies could be delivered without cluttering the paths. The tunnels were practical, yes, but they were also symbolic. Everything hidden, everything controlled, everything perfect on the surface. Louise's health had never been robust. She tired easily. She suffered from headaches. She spent winters in warmer climates when the New York cold became too much. But she was there. She was present. She walked the island. She approved the plans. She believed in the castle because George believed in it. And belief in a marriage can be contagious. The construction budget had long since abandoned any connection to reason. Estimates put the total cost at $2.5 million by the end of 1903. In modern terms, that is roughly $80 million for a private residence on an island. That would be used optimistically a few months each year. But cost was not the point. The point was permanence. The point was proof. The point was building something so grand, so complete, so undeniably real that it could not be taken away. except that everything can be taken away. The island in 1903 was a place of contradictions. It was romantic and industrial. It was intimate and vast. It was a love letter written in limestone and steel, but love letters are fragile things, and steel rusts and limestone cracks, and the people they are written for do not live forever. Workers noticed Boldt's intensity. He visited the island often, inspecting progress, demanding updates, adjusting timelines. He was not cruel, but he was unyielding. The castle had to be perfect. It had to be done. It had to be ready. Ready for what? A life, a future, a series of mornings that would justify the years of noise and dust and expense. The castle was not a monument, not yet. It was supposed to be a home, a place where devotion could finally rest, having proven itself in stone. But devotion does not rest. It escalates. It demands. It converts every gesture into a test of whether the next gesture will be bigger. By the winter of 1903, the castle was roughly 80% complete. The bones were done. The skin was on. The organs were being installed. Heating systems, plumbing, electrical wiring snaking through walls like veins. The building was becoming alive in the way buildings do when they are almost ready to be inhabited. Louise spent that winter in New York. The city was easier, warmer, closer to doctors if she needed them. She trusted George to oversee the final push. He had always been the builder. She was the reason for the building. That division of labor had worked for years. But trust is a strange foundation for a castle. It holds weight until it doesn't. The island in early 1904 was alive with purpose. Workers moved through the site like blood through a body. The powerhouse generators hummed. The tunnels echoed with footsteps. The main building stood tall against winter skies, waiting for spring, waiting for completion, waiting for the life it was designed to hold. And then the telegram came. The entire project depended on two people staying alive and aligned. That is the fragility no one talks about when building monuments to love. The monument does not care. The monument will stand whether or not the people it was built for survive to see it. But the meaning collapses, the purpose evaporates, and what remains is just stone, beautiful, and utterly empty. The dream was roaring. The palace was almost ready to crown the marriage. The island waited, humming with electric light and human hope for a future that would never arrive. The telegram that killed the island. 3 words can change a continent, but on Hart Island, they changed something worse: the meaning of every unfinished room. Louise Boldt died on January 7th, 1904. The cause was heart failure, sudden and absolute. She was in New York. George was likely at the Waldorf, managing the hotel that had made everything else possible. The telegram arrived. The words were simple, devastating, final. She was gone. George Boldt did not hesitate. He did not finish the week. He did not wait for a convenient moment to adjust the construction schedule. He sent word to Hart Island immediately. Stop. All of it. Every hammer, every saw, every brush. The work ended that day, not paused, ended. The workers on the island received the order and obeyed. Tools were set down mid-task. Scaffolding stayed where it stood. Rooms half-plastered remained half-plastered. The castle froze at roughly 4/5 complete, locked in the exact moment when purpose died. Imagine the silence. One day, the island rang, with hammers and saws and voices. The next day, nothing, just wind. Just the river lapping against stone. Just the empty rooms echoing with absence. The workers packed their belongings. They dismantled the temporary barracks. They crossed back to the mainland, leaving the island to itself. Some of them had spent years on the project. They knew the castle room by room, stone by stone. They had shaped it with their hands. And now it was over, not because the work was done, but because the reason for the work had stopped breathing. George Boldt never returned to Hart Island. That is the detail that turns tragedy into legend. He did not visit to inspect the halt. He did not walk the halls one last time. He did not stand in the unfinished ballroom and weep. He simply stopped. The island became a place he could not bear to see. The castle was meant to be a gift, a surprise, a culmination. Louise had seen it under construction, yes, but the finished version, the polished, perfected, complete version, was supposed to be a revelation. She was supposed to walk through those doors and see the dream made real. She was supposed to live there, to grow old there, to justify every dollar and every stone and every year of noise. Instead, she died, and the dream died with her, not slowly, not gradually, instantly. The telegram was the executioner. The message ended the castle as surely as it ended Louise. The tangible consequences were immediate. Scaffolding stood abandoned against the exterior walls, wood weathering in the wind. Inside, rooms were caught mid-transformation. Plaster stopped halfway up walls. Wooden floors were laid in some rooms, but not others. Electrical wiring hung loose, waiting for fixtures that would never be installed. The building was a snapshot of interruption, every surface screaming the same truth. This was not finished because it did not matter anymore. The island complex sat silent. The powerhouse generators went cold. The tunnels filled with darkness. The Ulster Tower stood alone, its stained glass windows staring at nothing. The dovecote held no doves. The gazebo framed no picnics. The boathouse sheltered no boats. The entire island became a stage set for a play that closed on opening night. Boldt returned to work. That is the strange part. He did not collapse. He did not retreat. He went back to the Waldorf and ran it with the same precision he always had. Guests were greeted. Meals were served. The hotel functioned as though nothing had changed, but something had changed. The man who returned was different. He was hollowed out, functional but empty, going through motions that no longer connected to meaning. He lived another 12 years, 12 years of managing the hotel, 12 years of public competence, 12 years of private avoidance. He never remarried. He never spoke publicly about the castle. He never explained the decision to halt construction. He simply let it stand there, unfinished, as if the incompleteness itself was the point. What does a man do when the only person the castle was for is gone? Apparently nothing. He does nothing. He lets the castle rot. He lets the tunnels flood. He lets the island return to wilderness. He turns a monument to love into a monument to loss, and he does it by doing absolutely nothing. The castle in 1904 was not a ruin. Ruins take time. The castle was a wound, fresh, raw, bleeding mortar and splintered wood and shattered plans. It was a place where hope had been murdered by biology, where devotion had collided with mortality and lost. Visitors to the Thousand Islands could see the castle from the water. It sat there, pale and silent, turrets rising like accusations. People asked questions. What happened? Why did it stop? The answers filtered out slowly. Gossip, rumor, eventually truth. George Boldt built a castle for his wife. She died. He stopped. That was the story. Simple, devastating, unforgettable. But the story was not over. The castle still stood. The island still waited. and time, indifferent to grief, kept moving. The question was no longer whether Boldt would finish the castle. The question was what the unfinished castle would become without him. A ruin, a curiosity, a warning, a legend. All of those, none of those. The answer would take 73 years to fully reveal itself. The rooms that never heard footsteps. An unfinished castle does not decay like a normal house. It decays like a promise that was interrupted. The years after 1904 were cruel, not dramatic, just steady. Weather moved in, winter after winter. Ice formed on the river and wrapped around the island like a fist. Spring came and melted the ice, but the damage remained. Water seeped into cracks, froze, expanded. Stone that had been cut to perfection began to fracture. Mortar that had been mixed for permanence began to crumble. The castle had no one to defend it, no caretakers, no maintenance staff, no one to patch leaks or replace broken windows or sweep out the debris. The building was abandoned in the most complete sense of the word, left to survive on its own or not survive at all. Rooms that had never been lived in started dying anyway. The ballroom, grand and echoing, collected leaves. Wind blew through the glassless windows and scattered them across the floor like confetti from a wedding that never happened. The library, designed for quiet afternoons with books and tea, filled with dust and bird droppings. Pigeons nested in the rafters. Squirrels chewed through wooden trim. The unfinished rooms were eerily specific. Some walls had plaster. Others showed bare lath and brick. Some floors were polished wood. Others were rough subfloor, scarred with boot prints from workers who never returned. The building existed in a strange limbo, too complete to ignore, too incomplete to inhabit. The dual nature of the decay created a haunting effect. In finished rooms, you could imagine life. You could picture furniture, rugs, paintings on the walls. But the imagination crashed into the unfinished rooms, where the fantasy collapsed into raw construction. It was like walking through a dream that kept waking up into reality, over and over, room by room. People began to trespass. That was inevitable. An abandoned castle on a visible island draws curiosity like a magnet. Boaters rowed over from the mainland. Teenagers looking for adventure. Photographers hunting for images. Vandals hunting for anything they could carry away. The island had no defense, no gates, no guards, just silence and stone. The vandalism was not systematic. It was opportunistic. Windows were broken. Doors were pried off hinges. Fixtures were stolen. Anything portable, anything valuable, anything that could be sold or kept as a souvenir, disappeared. The castle was looted slowly, piece by people who saw abandoned property, not sacred ground. But the real vandal was time. Human theft was small, scale. Time was relentless. Every year, the roof leaked a little more. Every winter, the freeze and thaw cycle worked deeper into the stone. Every spring, plants grew in the cracks. Roots pushed into mortar joints. Vines climbed the walls. The island was reclaiming the castle, slowly converting human ambition back into wilderness. The powerhouse fell silent. The generators, once the heart of the island's electrical system, rusted into sculpture. The tunnels filled with groundwater. The carefully carved passages became underground rivers, cold and dark, accessible only to the desperate or the foolish. The infrastructure collapsed first. The decoration lasted longer, but not forever. Inside the main building, weather created strange effects. Rain came through the open roof and pooled on floors. In winter, the pools froze into skating rinks. In summer, they evaporated, leaving behind mineral stains that looked like abstract paintings. The building was creating its own art, unintentional and eerie. Visitors who trespassed reported a consistent feeling. They described it as sadness, not fear, though the place was unsettling. Sadness, as if the building itself was grieving. The empty rooms felt expectant, like they were still waiting for someone to arrive. The half-finished details, the abandoned tools, the plans that would never be executed, all of it added up to a single overwhelming emotion: loss. Was Boldt protecting the memory or punishing himself with it? The answer depends on what you think protection looks like. He never returned, true, but he also never sold the island, never transferred ownership, never allowed anyone else to finish what he had started. The castle remained his, legally and emotionally, even as it decayed. He kept it the way someone keeps a wound, not to heal it, to remember it. The Thousand Islands community watched the decay with fascination. The castle became a local legend, a ghost story without ghosts, a romance without a happy ending. Tour boats began including it in their routes. Guides would point to the island and tell the story. George Boldt, Louise, the telegram, the halt. The legend grew with each telling, polished smooth by repetition. But legends simplify. They make stories clean. The reality was messier. The castle was not just romantic tragedy. It was also architectural waste. It was millions of dollars rotting in plain sight. It was craftsmanship dissolving into ruin. It was a monument to the fact that even the richest man cannot control death, but he can refuse to let go. By the 1920s, the castle was already a ruin. By the 30s, it was picturesque decay. By the 40s, it was a landmark. By the 50s, it was endangered. The roof was failing. The walls were cracking. The building was approaching a tipping point. Soon it would be too damaged to save, even if someone wanted to. The island sat there, visible from every passing boat, decaying in public. A slow-motion collapse watched by thousands but saved by no one. The rooms that never heard footsteps filled with rain and wind and time. The building aged without living. The dream rotted without waking. And still, the question remained. What was the castle now? A monument to love? A monument to grief? A monument to the fact that some promises cannot be kept, no matter how much stone you pile on top of them? The answer was all of those, and none of those. The castle was simply there, unfinished and undying, waiting for someone to decide what it meant. The man who would not return. People said he never set foot on the island again, but the harder truth is that he never truly left it either. George Boldt lived 12 more years after Louise died. 12 years at the Waldorf Astoria. 12 years of menus and meetings and maintaining the machinery of hospitality. He was 65 when he died in 1916. He died wealthy. He died accomplished. He died alone. The public saw competence. The Waldorf ran smoothly. Guests were pampered. Standards were maintained. Boldt moved through his days with precision, the same precision that had built an empire. But precision is not the same as presence. He was there, but he was also somewhere else, somewhere frozen in January 1904. He never spoke publicly about the castle, not in interviews, not in letters that survive, not in any record that historians have found. The island became an absence in his life, a blank space shaped like loss. He owned it. He paid taxes on it, but he never visited, never finished, never sold. That refusal is the key. Selling the island would have been practical. Finishing the castle would have been closure. Doing nothing was the choice of a man who could not move forward, but refused to let go. The castle became a monument to paralysis, and Boldt became the caretaker of his own grief, tending it by ignoring it. Friends and colleagues must have asked, "What will you do with the island? Are you going to finish it? Are you going to sell?" The questions would have been natural, even kind, but Boldt had no answers. Or he had one answer, repeated in different forms: nothing. He would do nothing. The island would stay as it was, unfinished, untouched, slowly decaying into the shape of his refusal. The psychological split is fascinating. At work, Boldt was a problem solver. Guests complained about a draft in the dining room? Fix it. Revenue dipped in the off-season? Adjust pricing. A rival hotel open nearby? Outcompete them. He spent his entire career making decisions, solving problems, controlling outcomes. But the island was the one problem he would not solve. Because solving it would mean admitting Louise was gone. Finishing the castle would mean the castle was no longer for her. Selling the island would mean the dream was over. As long as the castle stood unfinished, the dream was only interrupted. Paused. Waiting. As long as Boldt refused to return, he could pretend he was protecting something, not abandoning it. But pretending takes energy. The longer he avoided the island, the harder it became to face. The castle stopped being a place and became a symbol of everything he could not control. Death. Loss. The fact that all his money and all his influence could not keep one person alive. The Waldorf Astoria in the 1910s was the center of American society. Teddy Roosevelt dined there. John Jacob Astor kept a suite. The wealthy and powerful gathered in the lobbies and ballrooms, making deals, making marriages, making history. Boldt moved among them, charming and attentive, the perfect host. But underneath the charm was a man who had lost the only audience that mattered. He never remarried. That detail is often noted in retellings of the story, as if it proves the depth of his devotion. But maybe it just proves he was stuck. Stuck in January 1904. Stuck in a version of himself that existed only in relation to Louise. Without her, he functioned, but he did not grow. He did not change. He did not heal. The castle, meanwhile, decayed. Every year Boldt did not visit, the building deteriorated a little more. Roofs leaked, windows broke, vandals stole, nature reclaimed. The island was dying the way Boldt was dying, slowly and without intervention, the difference being the island was visible and Boldt was not. People romanticize his refusal to return. They call it devotion. They say he loved her too much to face the place they had built together. But love and avoidance are not the same thing. Love would have finished the castle in her memory. Love would have honored the work she had seen and approved. Avoidance just let it rot. The castle stopped being a project and became a sealed chamber in his mind, a place he could not enter without breaking. So he stayed away. He stayed away so completely that the island became more real in his absence than it ever could have been in his presence. The unfinished rooms haunted him precisely because he would not look at them. He died in 1916. The cause of death is not dramatic. He was old. He was tired. He had spent 12 years managing a hotel and avoiding an island. His will did not mention the castle. The property passed to his heirs, who had no attachment to it, no reason to finish it, no desire to maintain it. The island became an inheritance no one wanted. The estate tried to sell it. There were inquiries, potential buyers. But the castle was a problem. It was too unfinished to live in, too expensive to complete, too famous to demolish. It sat on the market for years, a white elephant made of limestone, beautiful and utterly impractical. Eventually, the estate stopped trying. The island stayed in the family, technically, but no one visited. No one maintained. No one cared. The castle entered a new phase of abandonment, this one colder than the first. When Boldt abandoned it, there was still grief, still emotion, still a reason. When his heirs abandoned it, there was just indifference. The island sat alone. 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. Winters came and went. Ice formed and melted. The castle aged without purpose, without protection, without hope. It became a ruin not because of war or fire or earthquake, but because one man loved one woman and could not survive her death. That is the tragedy no one talks about. Not that Louise died. People die. That is biology. The tragedy is that George Boldt let the castle die too, slowly, by refusing to finish what he started. He built a monument to love, and then he turned it into a monument to the fact that love, without action, is just weather and decay. The man who would not return kept the castle locked in time, but time does not stop. It just moves slower when you are not watching. And when Boldt finally died, the castle was still there, still waiting, still unfinished, still holding its breath. 73 winters of teeth. Every winter, the river iced over, and every spring, the castle woke up a little more wounded than before. 73 years. That is how long the castle sat abandoned between the halt in 1904 and the transfer in 1977. 73 winters. 73 freeze and thaw cycles. 73 chances for weather to do what George Boldt would not: finish the job. Winter in the Thousand Islands is not gentle. Temperatures drop below zero. The St. Lawrence River freezes solid, thick enough to walk on, thick enough to drive on in some years. Ice forms in every crack, every joint, every gap in the castle's skin. Water expands when it freezes. That expansion is relentless. It pushes stone apart. It fractures mortar. It turns small cracks into canyons. Spring arrives and the ice melts. Water drains away, leaving the damage behind. Gaps widen. Joints loosen. The next winter, more water seeps in, deeper this time, and the cycle repeats, 73 times. Each winter worse than the last. Each spring revealing new wounds. The roof was the first casualty. Boldt had installed a partial roof, but not a complete one. Some sections were covered. Others were open to the sky. The covered sections leaked. The open sections let rain and snow fall directly into the rooms below. Floors rotted, ceilings sagged. The building began to collapse from the top down, one room at a time. The turrets suffered worst. Their conical roofs were designed for beauty, not for abandonment. The peaks collected snow. The weight stressed the supports. Shingles blew off in storms. Water poured in. The wooden framing inside the turrets rotted until the stone walls stood alone, hollow shells with nothing to hold them up but habit. Vandalism accelerated the decay. The castle was visible, accessible, unguarded. People rode over from the mainland, climbed through broken windows, and took whatever they wanted. Copper wiring was stripped from the walls. Fixtures were pried loose. Anything, metal, anything sellable, anything portable, disappeared. The island became a quarry for scavengers, but human damage was small compared to what nature did. Plants grew in the mortar joints. Roots pushed into cracks. Trees sprouted from gutters. The island's soil was thin, but life is persistent. Vines climbed the walls. Moss covered the stone. The castle began to look less like a building and more like a geological formation, something the earth had produced rather than something humans had imposed. Birds colonized the upper floors. Pigeons, crows, owls. They nested in the rafters, in the empty window frames, in the hollow spaces behind walls. Their droppings accumulated, acidic, corrosive, eating into wood and stone. The building became an ecosystem, a habitat for creatures that did not care about romance or tragedy or Gilded Age excess. The ballroom, once designed for waltzes and champagne, filled with debris. Chunks of plaster fell from the ceiling. Broken glass covered the floor. Graffiti appeared on the walls, layer after layer, names and dates and crude drawings left by trespassers who treated the castle like a canvas. The room stopped being architecture and became archaeology, a record of who had been there and what they had thought worth marking. The tunnels flooded. Groundwater seeped in, slow and steady. The passages that had been carved to move servants invisibly became underground rivers, dark, cold, dangerous. The electric lights that once lit the tunnels rusted into stumps. The walls grew slick with algae. The floors disappeared under black water. The tunnels became inaccessible, a hidden network of decay beneath the visible ruin. The powerhouse collapsed first. It was the most utilitarian building, the least protected, the easiest to ignore. The generators, once the pride of the island, became abstract sculptures of rust and vines. The roof caved in, the walls leaned. Eventually, the entire structure slumped into itself, a pile of stone and metal and regret. The Ulster Tower survived better, but only because it was smaller. The stained glass windows shattered. The interior staircases rotted, but the stone shell held. It stood alone near the water, a miniature fortress, watching the main castle die room by room. By the 1950s, the castle was famous for being ruined. Photographers came to document the decay. Artists came to paint it. The romanticism of the story collided with the aesthetics of abandonment, and the result was a kind of cultural fascination. The castle became beautiful because it was broken, tragic because it was incomplete, famous because it embodied a kind of loss everyone could understand. But beauty does not stop rot. The castle was dying. By the 1960s, structural engineers warned that the building was approaching a point of no return. The walls were compromised. The foundations were shifting. Much more decay, and the castle would be unsalvageable. It would have to be demolished for safety, erased from the island, leaving only the legend behind. The contrast between Gilded Age permanence and the reality of decay was stark. Boldt had built with the best materials, limestone from the finest quarries, steel from the best mills, craftsmanship from the most skilled workers. He had built for eternity, but eternity requires maintenance. Without it, even the finest materials surrender. Stone bleeds mortar. That is the phrase stonemasons use. Mortar is softer than stone. It erodes first. Once the mortar goes, the stones lose their bond. They shift, they crack, they fall. The castle was bleeding mortar for 73 years, and no one was there to stop the hemorrhage. Steel rusts. Even the best steel, even galvanized steel, rusts when exposed to moisture and air and time. The structural beams inside the castle walls were corroding. Slowly, invisibly, but relentlessly. The building was losing its skeleton, and skeletons once gone cannot be replaced. How does an abandoned love letter survive long enough to become a legend? By being visible, by being dramatic, by being located where people can see it and wonder. The castle survived because it was on an island in a navigable river, passed by boats, photographed by tourists, included in every retelling of regional history. It survived because forgetting it was impossible. But survival is not the same as thriving. The castle survived as a warning, a reminder, a monument to the fact that devotion, when frozen at the moment of loss, becomes its own kind of destruction. George Boldt built the castle to prove love. The 73 winters proved that love without action is just entropy with a good story. The island in 1976 was a disaster. The castle was dangerous. The tunnels were flooded. The powerhouse was rubble. The grounds were overgrown. The entire complex was one storm away from irreversible collapse. Something had to change. Someone had to intervene. Or the castle would finish dying, and the legend would become a footnote. The $1 resurrection deal. The castle was not saved by romance. It was saved by paperwork, $1, and a promise about public memory. In 1977, the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority acquired Hart Island for $1. $1. The entire complex, the castle, the island, the tunnels, the ruins, the legend, all of it transferred for the price of a cup of coffee. But the dollar was symbolic. The real price was obligation. The Bridge Authority agreed to restore and maintain the property, to open it to the public, to preserve the site not as a private tragedy, but as a public monument. The transfer was not a sale. It was a conversion, from grief object to heritage asset, from Boldt's prison to everyone's curiosity. The decision was pragmatic. The Boldt heirs had no use for the island. It was a liability, an expensive, dangerous, crumbling liability. Taxes, insurance, risk of lawsuits if trespassers got hurt. The island was costing them money and giving them nothing in return. The dollar deal let them walk away clean. The Bridge Authority saw potential. The Thousand Islands region depended on tourism, boats, fishing, summer cottages, historic sites. The castle was already famous. People pointed at it from tour boats. They asked about it. They wanted to visit. The authority recognized that fame could be monetized, not exploited exactly, preserved, maintained, made accessible, turned into the kind of attraction that draws visitors, generates revenue, and justifies its own existence. But restoration was daunting. The castle had been abandoned for 73 years. The damage was catastrophic. The roof leaked everywhere. The walls were cracked. The floors were rotten. The infrastructure was gone. Restoring the building was not a project. It was a campaign, a multi-decade, multi-million-dollar campaign. The authority started with stabilization. That was the first priority. Stop the bleeding, patch the roof, shore up the walls, seal the windows, make the building safe enough to work on. Stabilization alone took years and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The work was unglamorous. Tarps and scaffolding, temporary braces, drainage systems to divert water. The goal was not beauty. The goal was preventing further collapse. By the early 1980s, stabilization was complete. The building was no longer actively dying, but it was far from restored. The authority faced a philosophical question. What does it mean to restore an unfinished castle? Do you finish what Boldt started? Do you preserve the incompleteness? Do you restore some rooms and leave others frozen in 1904? The answer was compromise. The authority decided to restore selectively. Some rooms would be finished to show what the castle was supposed to be. Other rooms would be left incomplete to show why the work stopped. The building would tell two stories simultaneously. The story of the dream and the story of the interruption. Restoration work began in earnest in the mid-1980s. Craftsmen were hired, materials were sourced. The goal was authenticity. Where possible, original techniques were used. Stone was carved by hand. Plaster was mixed to match the original formulas. Wood was milled to period specifications. The work was slow, expensive, and meticulous. The ballroom was one of the first rooms restored. It was large, dramatic, photogenic. Restoring it sent a message. The castle was coming back. The plaster was repaired. The floor was refinished. Chandeliers were installed, replicas of what Boldt had planned. The room became a showcase. Visitors could stand in the ballroom and see the vision, complete and polished, the way Louise never did. But other rooms were left untouched. The unfinished bedrooms, the half-plastered walls, the rooms where construction stopped mid-task. These were preserved exactly as they were found. Tools were left in place, or replicas were placed where tools would have been. The goal was to freeze the moment of halt, to let visitors see the interruption as a physical fact. The cost escalated quickly. Initial estimates put restoration at $5 million. That was optimistic. By the 1990s, spending had passed $10 million. By the 2000s, $15 million. The work never stopped. Every completed room revealed 10 more problems: structural issues, water damage, rot hidden behind walls. The castle was a bottomless project, demanding more money, more time, more expertise. Funding came from multiple sources: gate receipts from visitors, grants from preservation societies, donations from individuals who loved the story. The Bridge Authority ran the operation like a business. Admission fees were reinvested into restoration. Merchandise sales funded repairs. The castle became self-sustaining, more or less, a machine that generated money to heal itself. But the restoration raised uncomfortable questions. Can you restore a tragedy without rewriting it? The castle was famous because it was unfinished, because it embodied loss, because it was a monument to grief. Finishing it, even partially, changed the meaning. It converted the castle from a tomb into a theater, from a private wound into a public spectacle. The authority was careful. They emphasized the history, the story of George and Louise, the telegram, the halt, the 73 years of decay. The restoration was framed as preservation, not completion. The goal was not to erase the tragedy, but to make it accessible, to let people see it, feel it, understand it. By the early 2000s, the castle was stable. Major rooms were restored. The grounds were maintained. The island was safe for visitors. Boat tours ran daily in the summer. Thousands of people walked through the halls every year. The castle had become what it was never supposed to be, a tourist attraction. The scale of the transformation is staggering. A private Rhineland palace built for one woman, abandoned for 73 years, bought for $1, restored for $15 million, and visited by hundreds of thousands. The castle survived because it was converted, from personal to public, from love, letter, to lesson, from monument to warning. The $1 resurrection deal was not about money, it was about meaning. The Bridge Authority bought the island, yes, but what they really acquired was a story. And stories, when managed carefully, are worth more than buildings. The castle became valuable because it was tragic, famous because it was incomplete, preserved because it taught something no one wanted to forget. But what exactly does it teach? That depends on who is walking through the doors. Some see romance, some see waste, some see beauty, some see warning. The castle, restored and accessible, has become a mirror. It reflects back whatever the visitor brings with them. And the restoration continues. It always will. Stone decays, wood rots, the river keeps freezing. The castle will never be done. Not because George Boldt refused to finish it, because finishing, in architecture, is an illusion. Buildings are always dying. Maintenance is just the act of dying slower. The tour that feels like trespassing visitors enter through grand doors, yet many describe the same sensation, as if they are walking through someone else's unfinished sentence. The approach by boat is deliberate. You cannot drive to Hart Island. You cannot walk. You have to take a ferry or a private boat, and the journey across the water creates a threshold. You leave the mainland behind. You cross the river. You arrive at a place that feels separate, isolated, preserved. The island itself is beautiful. Trees, gardens, stone paths. The Ulster Tower near the water. The powerhouse ruins in the distance. And the castle, pale and enormous, rising at the center like a promise carved in limestone. From the outside, it looks almost complete. The turrets stand tall. The walls are intact. The roof, restored in sections, covers most of the building. Only when you get close do you see the gaps. The windows without glass. The doors that open onto unfinished rooms. The tour begins at the main entrance. Visitors are guided through a planned route. The ballroom first, fully restored, chandeliers glittering, floor polished to a mirror shine. The room is stunning, grand, exactly the kind of space you imagine when you hear the word castle. But the beauty is unsettling, because you know no one danced here, no one celebrated. The room was finished by strangers, decades after the people it was meant for were dead. From the ballroom, the route moves to the library, restored, elegant. Shelves line the walls, but the books are replicas. The furniture is reproduction. The room is a stage set, historically accurate but emotionally empty. It is a room designed to look lived in, but the illusion cracks when you remember no one ever lived here. Then the tour shifts. You enter the unfinished sections, rooms where plaster stops halfway up the wall, where wooden studs are exposed, where you can see the bones of the building, the framework, the infrastructure. These rooms are the heart of the experience. They are where the story lives. The unfinished rooms create cognitive dissonance. Your brain expects completion. Walls should be smooth. Floors should be level. Windows should have glass. But here, nothing is finished. The rooms are frozen in process. You can see where workers stopped. You can imagine tools being set down. You can feel the interruption. Guides tell the story as you walk. George and Louise, the dream, the telegram, the halt, the 73 years, the restoration. The narrative is polished, rehearsed, delivered with just enough emotion to land, but not enough to feel manipulative. The guides know the story sells itself. They just have to get out of the way. But the story is not the only thing visitors experience. There is something else, something harder to name, an atmosphere, a presence, a feeling that the building is not quite empty. Reports of paranormal activity are common. Footsteps in empty hallways, cold spots in rooms that should be warm, shadows moving at the edge of vision, voices faint and indistinct as if heard through walls. Visitors describe feeling watched, followed, not threatened exactly, just observed. The guides do not dismiss these reports, but they do not confirm them either. They acknowledge the stories, they mention the common experiences, but they also provide grounded explanations. Acoustics in stone corridors. Sound travels strangely in large empty spaces. Footsteps echo. Voices carry. What sounds like someone walking behind you might be your own steps reflecting off distant walls. Temperature gradients near the river. The island is surrounded by cold water. Air flows through broken windows and open doors, creating pockets of cold in specific rooms. Stand in the wrong spot and you will feel a sudden chill. Not supernatural, just physics. Suggestion effects in guided storytelling. When you tell someone a building is haunted, they start looking for ghosts. Every creak becomes footsteps. Every draft becomes a presence. The story primes the brain to interpret normal phenomena as paranormal. The mind fills in the gaps, but the explanations do not eliminate the unease. Even skeptics admit the castle feels strange, not scary, not dangerous, just incomplete, as if the building is still waiting for something, still holding space for people who will never return. The emotional climax of the tour happens in the upper floors, bedrooms that were meant for Louise, rooms designed with specific tastes, specific preferences, rooms that never felt her presence. Standing in those spaces, knowing they were built for someone who died before they were done, creates a weight, a sadness, a sense of waste. Visitors react differently. Some cry, some go quiet, some take photos and move on. But most people leave the castle feeling something, not just educated, not just entertained, moved. The castle reaches into you and touches something universal, the gap between intention and outcome. The fragility of plans, the fact that love, no matter how grand, cannot stop time. The grounds are part of the experience. The gardens have been restored. Paths wind through trees. Benches overlook the river. The Ulster Tower is open for exploration, its spiral staircase leading to a roof deck with panoramic views. From the top, you can see the entire island, the main castle, the ruins, the water, the mainland in the distance. The view is breathtaking and melancholy. The tour ends at the gift shop. That is the modern reality. History is a product. The castle survives because people pay to see it. The gift shop sells books, postcards, replicas, small pieces of the story you can take home. The transaction is clean. You pay admission. You walk through history. You buy a souvenir. You leave. But many visitors describe hesitation at that final moment, as if leaving feels wrong, as if the castle is not done with them yet. The sensation of trespassing lingers. You entered through a front door, yes. You paid money, yes. You followed a guided route, yes. But the feeling remains. You walked through someone else's grief. You stood in rooms designed for private joy and private loss. You witnessed an interruption that was never meant to have an audience. The castle is alive again, but the love story is still stuck. The restoration brought the building back. The tourism brought the people back. But the core of the story, the reason the castle exists, remains frozen in January 1904. Louise is still dead. George is still gone. And the castle, no matter how polished, is still unfinished in the ways that matter. Visitors leave the island by boat. The return trip is quieter than the arrival. People process what they have seen, the beauty and the waste, the romance and the reality. The castle recedes into the distance, pale and permanent, waiting for the next group of strangers to walk through its unfinished sentence. A monument that charges admission. The most uncomfortable question is not whether the castle is beautiful. It is whether beauty can justify the wound it preserves. Heritage tourism is a strange industry. It takes tragedy, polishes it, and sells access. The transaction is not cynical, exactly, but it is transactional. You pay money. You receive a story. The story is real. The money is real. and the gap between them is where the discomfort lives. Boldt Castle operates as a self-sustaining attraction. Admission fees, gift shop sales, event rentals. The island hosts weddings now. Couples exchange vows in the ballroom that George built for Louise. The irony is heavy. A monument to interrupted love becomes the backdrop for new promises. The castle survives because people want to get married there, want to take photos there, want to touch the tragedy and feel something. The numbers are public. The Thousand Islands Bridge Authority reports annual visitor counts, revenue, restoration spending. Transparency is part of the model. The public owns the castle now, technically. The authority manages it on behalf of the public. The finances are supposed to be open. In recent years, the castle attracts over 100,000 visitors annually. Peak season is summer, June through September, when the river is warm and the weather is cooperative. Admission is roughly $15 per adult. Do the math. That is $1.5 million in ticket sales alone. Add gift shop revenue, add event rentals, add donations. The castle generates significant income. But income is not profit. The restoration is ongoing. Every year, new problems emerge. Roofs need repair. Stone needs repointing. Systems need upgrading. The castle is a machine that consumes money to stay alive. The revenue covers most of the costs, sometimes all of the costs, sometimes more than the costs. But the balance is fragile. One bad season, one major storm, one unexpected structural issue, and the budget collapses. The transformation from abandoned site to maintained attraction required roughly $15 million over 4 decades. That is an average of $375,000 per year. Some years more, some years less. The spending is uneven, concentrated in bursts when major projects are undertaken. A roof replacement, a floor restoration, a masonry overhaul. The question is ethical, not financial. Is it right to profit from grief? The authority would say they are not profiting, they are preserving. The revenue goes back into the castle. The cycle is circular. Visitors pay to see the tragedy. The money maintains the tragedy. The tragedy attracts more visitors. The system sustains itself. But sustaining itself is not the same as justifying itself. What are visitors actually buying? Access to history, yes, but also access to emotion. They are paying to feel something: sadness, awe, melancholy. The commodification of feeling is what makes heritage tourism uncomfortable. The castle is not just a building. It is an emotional experience, packaged and sold. The guides are trained to balance information with sentiment. They tell the facts. They provide dates, names, numbers. But they also lean into the romance. They emphasize the love story. They describe Louise's preferences. They recount George's devotion. They frame the halt as tragedy, not failure. The narrative is shaped to maximize emotional impact, because emotional impact drives repeat visits, recommendations, word of mouth. The weddings are the most controversial aspect. Couples rent the castle for ceremonies. The ballroom, restored and elegant, makes a stunning venue. The island, private and scenic, offers exclusivity. The price is steep, several $1,000s for a few hours. But demand is high. People want to get married in a castle. The fact that the castle is a monument to lost love does not deter them. Maybe it attracts them. Maybe they believe their love will succeed where George and Louise's failed. The authority defends the weddings. The revenue funds restoration. The events bring visibility. The couples are respectful. The castle is a public asset, and public assets should serve the public. If people want to celebrate there, why not let them? But the discomfort remains. There is something transactional about celebrating new love in a space built for love that ended. The ballroom was designed for George and Louise. They never used it. Now strangers use it. The room is fulfilling its function, yes, but the function has been reassigned. From private dream to public commodity. The gift shop sells the legend, books about the Boldts, postcards of the castle, replicas of architectural details. The merchandise is tasteful, mostly. Historical, educational, but it is still merchandise. The tragedy is branded. The story is a product, and products exist to be sold. Who owns grief when it becomes a destination? Legally, the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority owns the island. Morally, the question is murkier. George Boldt owned the island when he was alive. His heirs owned it after he died. The authority owns it now. But the grief, the loss, the emotional core of the story, that belongs to no one, or it belongs to everyone, or it belongs to Louise and George, long dead, unable to object to what their story has become. The castle has been converted from a private failure into a public success. That is the sanitized version. The uncomfortable version is this. The castle failed as a home. It succeeded as a ruin. And now it succeeds as a tourist trap. Elegantly managed, historically significant, emotionally potent, but still, fundamentally, a place where strangers pay to witness someone else's unfinished grief. The preservation is real. The history is real. The education is real. But so is the transaction. So is the profit motive. So is the fact that tragedy, when dramatic enough, sells tickets. The most honest answer is that the castle survives because it is useful. Useful to the local economy. Useful to the tourism industry. Useful to people who need a wedding venue. Useful to historians who study Gilded Age excess. Useful to visitors who want to feel something bigger than their own lives. Usefulness is not the same as beauty, but it is enough to keep the lights on. The castle will keep operating as long as it generates revenue, as long as people keep coming, as long as the story stays compelling. The moment it stops being useful, the moment the visitors dry up, the funding will disappear, and the castle will start dying again, slower this time, but just as inevitably. Beauty cannot justify the wound, but utility can. That is the bargain. The castle survives not because it is beautiful, but because it is functional, and function, in the modern world, is measured in ticket sales. The myth versus the man. In the popular version, he is a perfect lover, but history usually punishes perfect stories with missing details. The legend is clean. George Boldt loved Louise Boldt. He built her a castle. She died. He stopped construction and never returned. The story fits in 3 sentences. It is romantic. It is tragic. It is repeatable. And repetition, over time, becomes truth. But the truth is messier. Not because the core facts are wrong. Louise did die. Construction did stop. George did not return. Those facts are documented. The mess comes from what we do not know. The gaps in the record. The missing letters. The unspoken motivations. History gives us events, not emotions. And emotions are where the myth lives. The famous phrase is, "Stop all construction." It appears in every retelling. George sent word to the island, "Stop all construction," immediately. The phrase is dramatic, definitive, the kind of command that echoes across time. But is it accurate? The historical record does not provide the exact wording. We know construction stopped. We know it stopped quickly, likely within days of Louise's death. But the specific phrasing? That is folklore. It might be true. It might be a polished version of something more mundane. The myth prefers the drama. History shrugs and moves on. The claim that George never returned to the island is better documented. No one has found evidence of a visit, no photographs, no letters, no contemporary accounts describing him on the island after 1904. The absence of evidence is not proof, but it is compelling. If he returned, he did so invisibly. And invisible returns do not change the legend. But why did he not return? The myth says love. He loved her too much to face the place without her. The story is beautiful, but there are other explanations. Guilt. He built the castle instead of spending time with her. Maybe the island reminded him of what he sacrificed. Avoidance. Facing the unfinished castle meant facing his own mortality. Maybe he could not bear the reminder. Practicality. He was busy. The Waldorf demanded his attention. Maybe the island was just too far away, too expensive, too complicated. The myth comforts us. The man unsettles us. Because the man, the real George Boldt, was not a romantic hero. He was a businessman, a self-made millionaire who clawed his way up from nothing. A man who understood leverage, margins, and control. He built hotels, not because he loved hospitality, but because hospitality was profitable. He built the castle, not just for Louise, but for himself, for what it said about him, for what it proved. Louise is even more mythologized. In the stories, she is perfect, beautiful, kind, the ideal woman. But we know almost nothing about her. A few photographs, a few mentions in letters. The rest is projection. We want her to be perfect because the story needs her to be perfect. If she was difficult, if the marriage was strained, if she was unhappy, the romance collapses. So we smooth her into a symbol, the perfect wife, the perfect muse, the perfect victim. The danger of the myth is not that it is false. The danger is that it is incomplete. It takes a complicated marriage, a complicated man, and a complicated decision, and it reduces them to a fairy tale. Fairy tales are useful. They teach lessons. They inspire emotion, but they do not capture reality. The reality is that George Boldt was a man who built a castle and then abandoned it. That is what happened. Why he abandoned it, what he felt, what he regretted, what he hoped, we can only guess. The castle is the evidence, the stone, the unfinished rooms, the 73 years of silence. That is what we have. The rest is storytelling. Historians stress restraint. Do not claim what cannot be proven. Do not invent emotions. Do not fill gaps with sentiment. Stick to the documents, the dates, the transactions, the verifiable facts. The myth does not care about restraint. The myth fills every gap with the most dramatic possibility. And the dramatic version is the one that spreads. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. George probably did love Louise. But love is not simple. It is tangled with ego, fear, control, need. He probably did grieve. But grief is not simple either. It is tangled with guilt, relief, anger, exhaustion. The castle is not a monument to pure love. It is a monument to human complexity, frozen at a moment when complexity became unbearable. Separating the myth from the man requires asking uncomfortable questions. Did George build the castle for Louise or for himself? Did he stop construction out of grief or out of paralysis? Did he avoid the island out of devotion or out of shame? The questions do not have clean answers. Maybe all of the above, maybe none. Maybe the questions themselves are wrong. What we know is this: a man built a castle. A woman died. The castle stopped. The man lived 12 more years and never went back. Those are facts. Everything else is interpretation. And interpretation, no matter how careful, is still storytelling. The myth is comforting because it gives us a clear villain: death. Death took Louise. Death ended the dream. George is innocent. He is a victim of circumstance. The story is tragic, but no one is at fault. That version lets us feel sad without feeling complicated. But what if George is not innocent? What if the castle was always a mistake? What if Louise did not want it? What if the building was his obsession, not hers, and her death freed him from an obligation he resented? Those possibilities are uncomfortable. They do not fit the romance. So we ignore them. Do we prefer the romance because the truth is harder to watch? Yes. We prefer stories that make sense, that have clear emotional arcs, that teach lessons we can understand. The messy truth, the version where motivations are mixed and outcomes are ambiguous, does not satisfy. So we polish it, we simplify it, we turn it into myth, and the myth works. It keeps people visiting. It keeps the castle alive. It keeps the story circulating. The myth is functional. The truth, whatever it is, does not need to be. The castle stands because the story is good, not because the story is true. The distinction matters, but only to historians. For everyone else, the castle is exactly what the myth says it is: a monument to love, a tragedy carved in stone, a reminder that even the richest man cannot control death. And maybe that is enough. Maybe the myth, even if incomplete, serves a purpose. It makes us feel. It makes us think. It makes us pay attention to a building that would otherwise be just another pile of expensive stone. The man is gone. The myth remains. And the castle, restored and accessible, plays its role. Not as history, as theater, a stage where the myth performs every day, for every visitor, forever. What an unfinished castle. Teach's Boldt Castle survives because it is incomplete, and that is the twist that turns romance into warning. The final reflection is not about love. It is about what happens when love stops being a feeling and starts being a structure. When devotion becomes architecture. When proof replaces presence. The castle teaches this lesson without words, just by existing, unfinished and undying, in the middle of the St. Lawrence River. A castle begun in 1900, stopped in 1904, exposed for 73 years, revived after 1977. Those are the coordinates, the dates that frame the story. But the lesson is not in the dates. The lesson is in the gap between intention and outcome, the space where plans collapse into reality. George Boldt had everything a man could want in the Gilded Age: wealth, influence, a hotel empire, a wife. But he wanted more. He wanted permanence. He wanted a monument that could not be taken away, so he built one, and it was taken away anyway, not by theft or fire or war, by death. The simplest, most ordinary villain, the one no amount of limestone can stop. The castle is a monument to excess. 120 rooms, 11 buildings, a private island, imported materials, year-round construction. The scale is staggering. But excess is not the lesson. The lesson is what happens when excess meets interruption. When the unstoppable force of wealth meets the immovable fact of mortality. Wealth can build anything. That is not a metaphor. That is literal. If you have enough money, you can hire enough people, import enough materials, and construct anything you can imagine. Castles, palaces, monuments. The limit is not resources. The limit is time. And time, unlike money, cannot be bought. George Boldt tried anyway. He tried to buy time by building permanence. If the castle was solid enough, beautiful enough, complete enough, maybe it could hold time still. Maybe it could create a space where he and Louise could live forever, insulated from age, disease, decay. But time does not negotiate. It moves. It takes. It ends things. No matter how much stone you pile between yourself and the inevitable. The castle stopped in 1904 because Louise stopped. The building was always dependent on her. Not because she was overseeing construction, she was not, but because the building had no meaning without her. It was for her, to her, about her. When she died, the why disappeared. And a building without a why is just a pile of expensive materials, pointless and sad. The 73 years of abandonment are the second lesson. Grief will always collect interest on what you refuse to finish. George Boldt could have completed the castle. He could have finished it in Louise's memory, opened it as a museum, donated it to the state, sold it to someone who would use it. Any of those choices would have been closure. Instead, he did nothing. He let the castle rot. He let it become a monument to his paralysis, not his love. The restoration teaches the third lesson. Public memory is cheaper than private grief. The Thousand Islands Bridge Authority saved the castle for $1. They spent $15 million restoring it. But the castle is useful now. It generates revenue. It attracts tourists. It serves a purpose. George's grief served no purpose. It just consumed. The public converted the castle from a wound into an asset, and the conversion worked because the public did not care about George's feelings. They cared about the building. Visitors walk through the castle and see romance. They see a man who loved his wife so much, he could not finish the monument he built for her. That interpretation is generous. The less generous interpretation is that George Boldt was a man who could not let go, who turned his grief into a monument and his monument into a prison, who spent 12 years managing a hotel while his castle rotted, because facing the castle meant facing what he could, not control. The unfinished rooms are the truth of the story. They are what makes the castle real. If the building had been completed, it would just be another Gilded Age mansion. Beautiful, yes. Historic, yes. But unremarkable. The incompleteness is what makes it memorable. The half-plastered walls, the exposed studs, the rooms frozen mid-task. The interruption is the point. The interruption is the lesson. You cannot finish grief. That is what the castle teaches. Grief is not a project. It is not something you can complete with enough effort, enough money, enough time. Grief is a state. You live in it, or you do not. George chose not to. He avoided the island. He avoided the castle. He avoided the grief by refusing to engage with it. And the refusal did not make the grief go away. It just made the grief permanent. The castle survived because it was incomplete. If George had finished it, it would have been used, sold, repurposed, forgotten. But because it was abandoned, because it was dramatic, because it embodied a story everyone could understand, it became famous. The incompleteness made it valuable, not financially, emotionally, culturally. The castle became a symbol, and symbols, once established, are hard to erase. The lesson for visitors is simpler. Be careful what you build, because buildings outlast intentions. The castle was supposed to be a love letter. It became a warning. It warns that devotion, when it becomes obsessive, when it demands proof, when it converts feeling into structure, can trap you. It warns that grief, when refused, does not disappear. It just waits. It warns that wealth can build monuments, but monuments do not comfort, do not heal, do not bring anyone back. Hart Island sits in the St. Lawrence River. The castle stands pale and permanent. Tourists arrive by boat. They walk through the halls. They take photos. They buy souvenirs. They leave. The cycle repeats day after day, year after year. The castle is alive because it is useful, but it is only useful because it failed. That is the final twist. Success would have made the castle invisible. Another mansion, another rich man's toy. Failure made it legendary. The incompleteness, the abandonment, the 73 years of decay, the $1 resurrection, all of it combines into a story too good to forget. George Boldt built the castle to prove love. The castle proved something else, that you can have wealth, that you can build anything, that you can control outcomes, manage timelines, hire the best, import the finest. But you cannot survive an unfinished goodbye. You cannot build your way out of loss. You cannot convert devotion into stone and expect the stone to love you back. The castle stands. The lesson stands with it. And the river keeps flowing, indifferent to both.